I just want to finally take a look at some invalid patterns of arguments, forms of inference uh, related to conditionals, if-then statements. And they're going to be analogous to the invalid arguments that we saw with regard to the categorical, the predicate logic inferences that were bad, and common mistakes that are made. And keep in mind, I always do this with a great concern that I have not to confuse a lot of the students. And if you're struggling along, you're better off just focusing in on what the valid forms of inference, valid patterns of inference are. If you got that, you feel comfortable, then continue listening, because there are two patterns in the predicate logic that we saw were bad inferences, invalid arguments. That is, take a look at the first one. All A's are B's. X is a B, therefore X is a man. All men are mortal. Spot is mortal, therefore Spot is a man. Nah, Spot could be a dog. It can't conclude that. That was bad. Similarly, all men are mortal. Spot is not a man, therefore Spot is not mortal. We see, again, bad inferences. These are bad. Now let's look at the analogous patterns, which are mistakes that people make with regard to hypothetical propositions, if-then statements, and the inferences involved with them. If P then Q, Q therefore P. And if you're ever confused with if-thens, using the example of the president in the White House for P, Q, the president is Washington, D.C. If we need a third one, the president is in the United States. If between having that as P, Q, and R, we can handle most of the basic inferences, and it'll work out right. And if you remember, if the president's in the White House, well, the White House is in Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. is in the United States. So what's true is if the president is in the White House, he's also in Washington, D.C. So P is the first thing, the president is in the White House. Q is the second statement or proposition, the president is in Washington, D.C. Well, the next premise is the president is Washington, D.C. Can we conclude from that the president's in the White House? Absolutely not. The president could be in Congress, in a congressional office, talking to somebody. He could be in an embassy in Washington, D.C. He could be at the theater. He could be out to dinner with his family. So this is a bad inference, and you notice it's perfectly parallel to the one in predicate logic. The pattern is analogous. Similarly, looking at the second one, if P then Q, not P, therefore not Q, well, P, president's in the White House. If the president's in the White House, then Q, the president's in Washington, D.C. The president is not in the White House. Therefore, can we conclude the president is not in Washington, D.C.? No. As we said, he could be in a restaurant with his family. He could be addressing Congress. He could be meeting with some business leaders at some restaurant. So that, again, is a bad inference. The thing you really want to focus on, though, with regard to valid inferences regarding propositional logic is just the basic valid ones. And let me rewind and just get you to focus your attention on those. The important patterns, I got to roll forward 2 more slides. These are the 6 most important. We had the disjunctive syllogism or argument by elimination. Either P is true or Q is true. Q is not true, therefore P has to be true. We have that, but with these 6 inferences, which are really, basically you can, if you can remember 3, you've got all 6 of them, you're going to be able to figure out whether 80% of the arguments are valid. And keep in mind, we're going to be reconstructing arguments. So if we're reconstructing arguments, and we'll talk about this more later when we get up to it, we want to try to reconstruct the argument in such a way that it is valid.